This lecture is recorded by the Opticians Association of Canada. I gave the presentation to members of my profession. Part one of dealing with myopia gives an overview of the problem. You have to know the problem before you can treat it. To learn more about treating it with Ortho C, proceed to part two. And to learn more about the verification to the treatment, proceed to part three. There are lots of contact lenses on the market to control myopia. The difference is that an Ortho C lens has a different feature is that it does not just arrest the myopia, it attempts to reverse it. And the lens is an improved version of an existing lens on the market, an Ortho K lens. Both are flat lens, but one modification that stands out to differentiate it is that I use a flexible lens instead of lens that's stiff, but still consider an RGP lens. And the flexibility allows the lens to produce a draw instead of a push. And the contact lens draw is the key in the modified version of the lens. There are also other important features, which I would go over in a moment. The wearing frequency and the duration is less, once a week for 5 minutes. That's another major difference, not so much in the feature of the lens, but in the application. There's a series of follow-ups that you have to attend to afterwards. Before I elaborate on how all this is possible, I just want to relate to you a story of how I started on this journey. It all started with an idea, and the idea was that the lens of the eye has to play a part in any research on treating myopia. And the present way of addressing the symptoms is that the lenses ignore or bypass. The reason is that it does not seem to be a part of the problem. The problem is attributed to the axial length of the eye. But my argument is that it contributes to the problem, that it's part of near point stress. And I will talk about that in the next session. So if you want to reverse the myopia, you have to consider the lens as part of the reversal process. The research started with a grant I received from Athabasca University. It was the only university that helped me when other universities turned me down. I want to perform the research formally because that's how I differentiate it from other treatments, not based on any research at all, like those found on YouTube. And I published 4 research papers on my findings up to 2014. I chose Elsevier to publish most of my articles because it was a journal of choice from Galileo to Steve Hawkins. And it was a top journal. And it goes through a peer review process, and that gives my research credibility. A peer review means that other experts in the field will scrutinize my paper. The intention is supposedly not to poke holes in my work, but to provide constructive criticism so I can improve the paper. And in this lecture, I will present to you some of the critiques that I encountered for a different purpose, to improve your understanding of Ortho C. I want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Gary Hughes for sponsoring me and helping me with the ethics application at Athabasca University. I want to bring this up because I want him to see an excerpt of this presentation. He was the director of clinical practice at Yorkville University in New Brunswick. And I also want to thank Eric Jock for assisting me with the project all these years. Besides being an optician, he's also an engineer, along with a list of other credentials. And I continue to be amazed at the degree of expertise in our profession and the number of people willing to help me. And a big thanks to Lauren, who was there to suggest ways to press on. Even at times I thought of quitting. And also a big thanks to Daly for helping me to disseminate my findings. And thank you for organizing this lecture. I want to present an assumption. The assumption I'm making is that the lens of the eye and the ciliary muscles are still flexible. You do not need a myopia control lens to deal with the hyperopic defocus because the crystalline lens is not overcorrected at the periphery. And you do not need a minus lens to deal with residual myopia. The theory is that the lens of children and young teens is flexible enough to compensate for the elongated myopic eye. The lens must flatten out first. It can compensate for any refractive errors due to the elongated eye. It can mask it, but the process doesn't stop there. The elongated eye would eventually be stimulated to retract. It would usually follow suit, and that's the general trend. The retraction is due to the synchronization of the lens and the eyeball. And during development, the lens is segregated from the growth of the eye when it became myopic. And that's why reconnecting the lens with the eye is important. And you cannot reverse the elongated eyeball without synchronization first. When synchronization takes place, it is an indication that you are also restoring the developmental process in the case of a child. And you're also restoring the post-developmental process, as in the case of an adult. And that would assist in the treatment. At some point, you do not need the Ortho C lens at all. And I found that the developmental or the post-developmental process will take over. It's possible that sometimes the lens is not that flexible, and that's another assumption. In a future lecture, maybe I will go over another methodology in cases where the crystalline lens and the ciliary muscles are partially flexible, not totally flexible. In those cases, a myopic control lens is applied in conjunction with Ortho C because the lens cannot totally compensate for the nearsightedness. And the phenomena is common with adults. An example is when it would be applied in cases of treating severe myopia. And severe myopia is anything over -3. The ciliary muscle is partially flexible in the sense that it offers a partial recovery. It cannot compensate it for the overall myopic elongation of the myopic eye. The eyeball tends to elongate too much. So a child may compensate for it or most of it, but not an adult. It is also possible that the lens is not flexible at all. And that's another assumption I would talk about maybe in the future. But briefly, the alternative method is also applied in cases where the ciliary muscles, it sees. In this case, it's not partially relaxed at all, but totally sees. And spasticity had set in. It can occur not just in the severe myopic eye, but even in the moderate myopic eye. And sometimes when adults are subject to type 2 near point stress, the ciliary muscles can only partially relax, as I mentioned in previous example. And sometimes when you're subjected to type 3 near point stress, the ciliary muscles, it sees. And I would go over those phases of near point stress in a minute. And the ciliary muscles of a child, on the other hand, may still be flexible, even if they're subjected to type 3 near point stress, which is the worst case scenario. And this is the extent of how malleable the eyes of a child can become. In some cases, the spasticity of the ciliary muscles is not just due to type 3 near-point stress, but to an increase in the effort to see. It occurs not just when you want to make something out in the distance, but it is an unconditional or an unconscious response, even when there is nothing urgent or important to make out in the distance. It's the general reason why myopia control glasses are worn because of this habit. The myopia control lens would substitute for the crystalline lens to deal with hyperopic defocus and myopic defocus, as shown on the diagram. And the Ortho C lens would deal with the elongated myopic eye. But again, the assumption in this lecture is that the ciliary muscle is not seized, it's still flexible, and any excess effort to see is absent. In order to visualize the reverse, let's examine what happens when you are subjected to near-point stress. In other words, you have to know the problem first before you can attempt to correct it. And this is the premise of every research, but it's often ignored. Instead, they dive right into the research. Near-point stress is not necessarily the cause of myopia, but it may be the most common, and there are three types. In type 1 near-point stress, light rays from a close object are divergent, and a thicker lens converges the rays. Thicker means the lenses bulge or take on a rounder shape, and the eye is still in a spherical shape. And type 1 is what usually takes place when the eye focuses on a near object. The eye does not become myopic, even though the ciliary muscles tighten up and the lens becomes round, because close object is being viewed within the recommended range of 40 centimeters or 16 inches, and breaks are taken. In type 2 near-point stress, light rays from a close object again are divergent, and a thicker crystalline lens converges the rays to bring them into focus onto the retina. And the stress entices the eye to elongate. And this time, the increase in stress induces the eye to become myopic because breaks are not taken and the object of regard is closer than 40 centimeters. It takes a lot of effort to maintain the bulge shape of the lens under this condition to keep that object in focus. In type 3 near-point stress, light rays from a close object again are divergent, and the thicker lens converges the rays more, but the focal point is still behind the retina, as shown on the diagram. And the stress entices the eye to elongate more and become more myopic in the attempt to bring that focal point onto the retina. And the increase in stress induces the eye to become even more myopic because the object of regard is much closer than 40 centimeters due to wearing a minus lens. You are taking much more effort to maintain that focus under this condition. Now, what does this imply? Saw and company knew that previous research on the correlation between near work and myopia in Asia had a small sample size, and little is known about the impact of reading and the development of myopia in young children. They conducted a study of over 1,000 school children, just to increase the sample size, ages 7 to 9 years of age, in 2 schools in Singapore. And they found that children at that age who were exposed to reading were more likely to be myopic. They tend to read closer than the recommended range, and they do not take breaks. For example, I know one kid that plowed through a Harry Potter book in a few days, and geez, some of those books are over 500 pages. She read with a flashlight under the bed sheet, and by the time her parents caught her, she was already myopic. There's also a correlation between near work and progressive myopia. Progressive myopia is defined as an increase in myopia over a year of at least zero point 0.5 diopters. And Muha Madajak and company in 2014 found a correlation between near work and progressive myopia. It is due to the excess tension of the oblique muscles. Their sample size were 100 students who were already myopic, as opposed to the other case where they were not myopic. So, in other words, type 2 near point stress contributes to both to the onset of myopia and to progressive myopia. You have that knowledge as early as 2002, and no one made use of it. This is my contact information, and visit my website, correctmyopia.com. You can conduct a discussion with me there if you have any questions. There are only 2 steps involved in the drill. It is possible to conduct the treatment online if you live in another city or another country. There is no charge for the follow-ups, and some clients have been with me for over 10 years. And you can read about what they have to say about the results of applying Ortho C.